The mirror stretched across the entire east wall of Studio 17, reflecting nothing but empty wooden floors and dim afternoon light filtering through dust-covered windows. Maya Chen stood at the center of the room, her reflection fragmented by a crack that ran diagonally across the glass. A reminder of better days when the studio was packed with students and the mirrors were pristine. Her sneakers squeaked against the worn hardwood as she moved through a basic salsa sequence. Each step deliberate, but somehow hollow, like dancing to music only she could hear. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The building had been quiet for 3 hours now. No students had shown up for the intermediate hip-hop class, none for the beginner's ballroom either. Maya's phone set silent on the windowsill. No missed calls from parents asking about enrollment. No texts from dance enthusiasts looking for private lessons. Just the steady hum of the old air conditioning unit and the occasional car passing on the street below. She caught herself in the cracked mirror again and stopped mid-turn. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, loose strands framing a face that looked older than her 28 years. The purple tank top she wore had "Dance Like Nobody's Watching" printed across the front in faded gold letters, a gift from her first student, back when she believed those words meant something. Maya had opened Studio 17 with her life savings 2 years earlier, convinced that her passion for movement could translate into a thriving business in downtown Portland. The location seemed perfect, close to the university, surrounded by coffee shops and art galleries, in a neighborhood where creativity was supposed to flourish. She had painted the walls herself, installed the sound system with help from her brother, and spent weeks perfecting the lighting to create an atmosphere that felt both professional and welcoming. The first few months had been promising. College students filtered in for evening classes drawn by her affordable rates and patient teaching style. A few local professionals signed up for weekend workshops. Maya had even started developing relationships with nearby schools, hoping to bring in after-school programs that would provide steady income. But Portland's dance scene was more competitive than she had anticipated. Established studios with decades of reputation and polished marketing campaigns dominated the market. Chain fitness centers offered dance classes as part of their membership packages, undercutting independent instructors. Social media influencers taught choreography through video tutorials, making in-person instruction seem unnecessary to younger generations. Maya's background didn't help her case. She had learned to dance not in prestigious academies or through expensive private coaching, but in community centers and high school gymnasiums. Her technique was solid, her passion undeniable, but she lacked the credentials that impressed parents researching options for their children. No competition trophies lined her walls. Her resume didn't include training with famous choreographers or performances in notable productions. The cruel irony was that Maya had been told throughout her teenage years that she had no natural rhythm. Dance instructors at her high school had politely suggested she consider other artistic pursuits. Even her own family had questioned her decision to pursue movement as a career, pointing out that she had always been the one stumbling through school dance performances, never quite in sync with the music or her fellow dancers. But Maya had persisted through sheer determination. She spent hours practicing alone, watching videos, attending workshops, slowly building skills that others seemed to acquire effortlessly. She developed her own teaching methods based on patience and encouragement rather than criticism and comparison. She believed that anyone could learn to move with grace and confidence, regardless of their starting point. That philosophy had attracted a small but dedicated group of students during the studio's early days. People who had been intimidated by more competitive environments found comfort in Maya's classes. She specialized in helping absolute beginners, those who felt self-conscious about their coordination, individuals who wanted to dance for joy rather than perfection. The afternoon sun shifted lower, casting longer shadows across the studio floor. Maya walked to the sound system and queued up a playlist she had created for her advanced contemporary class, the one that hadn't met in 3 weeks due to lack of enrollment. The music began with a soft piano melody that gradually built into something more complex, layered with strings and subtle percussion. She began moving again, this time allowing herself to improvise rather than following structured choreography. Her body responded to the music's ebb and flow, finding connections between rhythm and emotion that felt more natural than any textbook technique. This was why she had fallen in love with dance in the first place, not for the applause or recognition, but for these moments of pure expression where dance became a language more eloquent than words. As she spun across the floor, Maya tried to push away thoughts about the studio's uncertain future. Rent was due in 2 weeks, and her savings account was nearly depleted. She had applied for small business loans, explored partnerships with local gyms, even considered selling the sound equipment to generate some quick cash. Nothing had materialized into a sustainable solution. The music swelled and Maya leapt, her arms extended as if she could somehow dance her way out of the financial pressure that threatened to close Studio 17 forever. For a brief moment, suspended in air, with sunlight streaming through the windows, she felt the same freedom that had drawn her to movement years earlier. The spell was broken by the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside. Maya landed softly and moved toward the door, wondering if perhaps a potential student had wandered up from the street. The building housed several small businesses, a graphic design firm, an accountant's office, a coffee roaster that filled the corridors with rich aromas each morning. She pressed her ear against the door and heard hushed voices speaking in what sounded like a foreign language. The words were clipped, urgent, delivered in tones that suggested careful coordination rather than casual conversation. Maya frowned. The building's other tenants typically worked during regular business hours and didn't conduct meetings in the hallways. The voices moved closer, and Maya could distinguish at least 3 different speakers. One had a deeper register, older perhaps, speaking with authority. Another responded in shorter phrases, deferential. The third barely spoke at all, contributing only occasional confirmations or questions. Maya's curiosity overcame her caution. She cracked the door open just enough to peer into the hallway, expecting to see confused visitors looking for one of the other offices. Instead, she found herself staring at 3 men in dark clothing that definitely didn't belong in her building. The older man was tall and lean, wearing a charcoal suit that looked expensive but practical. His gray hair was neatly trimmed, and his posture suggested military training.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
The second man was younger, stockier, with restless eyes that constantly scanned their surroundings. The third hung back slightly, his hand resting inside his jacket in a way that made Maya's stomach tighten with sudden alarm. They were studying a floor plan of the building, pointing to different sections while speaking in the same foreign language Maya had heard through the door. The older man traced routes with his finger, indicating specific rooms and what appeared to be entry and exit points. Maya's breath caught as she realized they were planning something that definitely wasn't legitimate business. Her first instinct was to close the door quietly and pretend she hadn't seen anything, but as she began to step back, the floorboard beneath her foot creaked loudly in the afternoon silence. All three men turned toward her door immediately, their conversation stopping mid-sentence. Maya froze, knowing she had been discovered but unsure how to proceed. The younger man's hand moved toward his jacket, mirroring his companion's suspicious posture. For several heartbeats, nobody moved. Maya could hear her own pulse in her ears, feel sweat forming on her palms despite the studio's air conditioning. She was trapped between disclosure and concealment, between confronting whatever these men were planning and hoping they would simply leave. The older man stepped toward her door, his expression unreadable but determined. He spoke a few words to his companions, then addressed Maya directly in accented English. "Excuse me," he said politely, as if they had bumped into each other at a coffee shop rather than during what appeared to be reconnaissance for something illegal. "We are looking for the office of Dr. Martinez. Perhaps you can help us." Maya knew there was no Dr. Martinez in the building. She had met all the other tenants during her first week, and the directory in the lobby listed every business clearly. This was obviously a pretext, a way of determining whether she was a threat to whatever operation they were conducting. "I'm sorry," Maya replied, her voice steadier than she felt, "but there's no Dr. Martinez here. You might want to check with the building manager downstairs." The man nodded thoughtfully, but his eyes never left her face. He was evaluating her, she realized, trying to determine how much she had seen and heard, whether she posed a problem that needed to be resolved. "Of course," he said finally. "Thank you for your assistance." But instead of turning to leave, he pushed Maya's door open wider and stepped into the studio, followed immediately by his two companions. Maya backed away instinctively, her mind racing through possible responses. She could scream, but the building was mostly empty and the street below was too far away for anyone to hear. She could try to run, but they were blocking the only exit. "This is a beautiful space," the older man continued conversationally, as if he were a potential customer rather than an intruder. "You are a dance instructor, I presume." Maya nodded, unsure whether honesty or deception would serve her better in this moment. The three men spread out slightly, not in an obviously threatening formation, but enough to ensure she couldn't easily reach the door. "Dance is a wonderful art form," the older man continued. "It requires discipline, precision, the ability to move with purpose and control. These are qualities I appreciate." The younger man said something in their foreign language, sounding impatient. The older man responded with a sharp phrase that clearly meant wait or be quiet. Maya caught the exchange and realized that whatever they were planning, her unexpected presence had created a complication they needed to resolve. "I'm afraid we have a problem," the older man said to Maya, his polite facade beginning to drop. "You have seen us here, and that creates difficulties for our work." Maya's mouth went dry as the implications became clear. These weren't burglars or vandals. They were professionals conducting some kind of operation in her building, and she had accidentally stumbled into something far more dangerous than a simple break-in. "I haven't seen anything," she said quickly. "I was just practicing, not paying attention to what was happening in the hallway. I don't know who you are or why you're here." The older man studied her for a long moment, then shook his head slightly. "I wish I could believe that, but we cannot take such risks. Too much depends on this operation proceeding without complications." The third man, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. His voice was rougher, less educated than his leader's. "We should just handle this quickly and move on. We're behind schedule already." Maya felt terror creeping up her spine as she realized they were discussing whether to kill her. She was an innocent bystander who had wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time, and now her life depended on convincing these strangers that she posed no threat to their plans. "Please," she said, trying to keep her voice calm and reasonable. "I run a small dance studio. I'm not involved in anything that would interest you. I just want to teach people to move and express themselves through art."
The older man seemed to consider this, but his expression remained skeptical. "Art is indeed valuable," he acknowledged, "but unfortunately it cannot take precedence over more practical concerns." Maya's training as a dance instructor had taught her to read body language, to notice subtle shifts in posture and movement that indicated a person's intentions or emotional state. She could see the older man's decision crystallizing, could observe the younger man's increasing agitation, could detect the third man's cold readiness to act. In that moment, with 3 armed strangers closing in and no clear path to safety, Maya Chen discovered something about herself that years of being told she had no rhythm had never revealed. When faced with mortal danger, when every second counted and the margin for error was non-existent, her body knew exactly how to move. The dance instructor who had struggled to find her beat in high school choreography, who had been overlooked by talent scouts and dismissed by prestigious academies, suddenly found herself in perfect synchronization with the most deadly rhythm of all, the dance between life and death that would test every skill she had ever developed. As the older man nodded to his companions and Maya saw hands reaching inside jackets for weapons that would end her life, she realized that all those years of patient practice, all those hours of learning to move with precision and control, had been preparing her for this moment when dancing wouldn't just be about expression or artistry, it would be about survival. The late afternoon light streaming through the studio's windows caught the dust motes floating in the air, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere as Maya prepared to discover whether a dance instructor who supposedly had no rhythm could perform the most important choreography of her life, a routine where missing a single step would mean never dancing again. The first man's hand emerged from his jacket, holding a black pistol with practiced efficiency. Maya's eyes locked onto the weapon, her dancer's training automatically calculating angles, distances, timing. She had spent years teaching students to move through space with awareness and control, to anticipate and respond to musical cues, to maintain balance while transitioning between positions. Now, instead of responding to a drum beat or melody, she would need to read the rhythm of violence, to find the spaces between intention and action where survival became possible. The studio that had been her sanctuary, her creative haven, was about to become a stage for the most challenging performance of her life. The older man spoke a single word in his foreign language, a command that Maya didn't need to understand to recognize as the signal for whatever came next. As the word echoed in the suddenly silent studio, Maya Chen, the dance instructor who had been told she had no natural rhythm, prepared to discover what her body could do when the music stopped and the dancing was all that stood between her and death. The mirror's crack seemed to split the reflected scene into fragments, Maya on one side, the 3 armed men on the other, the afternoon light creating sharp contrasts between shadow and illumination. In seconds, this peaceful dance studio would become something entirely different, and Maya would either find the rhythm that had eluded her for so many years or lose the chance to ever dance again. The younger man raised his weapon, and Maya's body began to move in ways that no choreographer had ever taught her, guided by instincts she never knew she possessed, flowing into a dance that would determine whether Studio 17 would ever see another student, another class, another moment of artistic expression shared between teacher and learner. Time seemed to slow as Maya realized that everything she had learned about movement, timing, and spatial awareness was about to be tested in the most literal life-or-death situation imaginable. The dance instructor, who had struggled to find her place in the competitive world of professional movement, was about to discover that when survival was the choreographer, rhythm came not from music but from the deepest instincts of human motion, and grace emerged not from training but from the desperate beauty of a body refusing to surrender. As the weapons trained on her and the men prepared to eliminate the witness who had accidentally discovered their presence, Maya Chen took her first step into a dance that would either prove her instructors wrong about her lack of natural rhythm or ensure that their assessment would be the last professional critique she would ever receive. The first gunshot shattered the studio's afternoon quiet like a cymbal crash in an empty concert hall. Maya's body responded before her mind could process what was happening, dropping into a low crouch as the bullet whined past her left shoulder and punched a hole through the already cracked mirror behind her. Glass fragments rained down in a glittering cascade, each shard catching the slanted sunlight as it fell. Maya rolled sideways across the hardwood floor, her years of teaching students how to fall safely during complex moves translating into an instinctive understanding of how to use momentum and surface contact to avoid injury. The second shot came immediately after the first, and she felt the heat of the bullet's passage as it carved through the air where her torso had been milliseconds earlier. The younger gunman cursed in his native language as his target refused to stay still. He had expected a simple execution, a terrified civilian frozen in place while he completed his task. Instead, he found himself trying to track a target that moved like water, flowing from position to position with an unpredictability that made accurate shooting nearly impossible in the confined space. Maya's mind cataloged every detail of the studio's layout as she moved. The sound system along the north wall, speakers mounted 8 feet high, the ballet bar running the length of the east side, positioned 3 feet from the shattered mirror, the storage closet in the southeast corner where she kept props, mats, and extra equipment, the windows facing the street, too high to reach and too small to escape through even if she could. The older man barked an order, and all 3 gunmen adjusted their positions to create overlapping fields of fire. They were professionals, Maya realized with growing dread. This wasn't random violence or a crime of opportunity. These men had training, coordination, experience in killing efficiently and methodically. A third shot sparked against the metal bracket holding one of the speakers, sending electronic components cascading to the floor in a shower of plastic and wire. Maya used the sound as cover to spring toward the ballet bar, her hands gripping the smooth wood as she vaulted over it in a movement that would have impressed her most athletic students. The 4th bullet splintered the barrel exactly where her hands had been, sending splinters of lacquered wood flying like tiny spears. Maya landed in a controlled roll, coming up behind the partial cover of a structural column that supported the building's upper floors. It was concrete and steel, part of the building's original construction when this space housed a manufacturing operation decades earlier. It was solid enough to stop bullets, but only 18 inches wide, providing minimal concealment for someone trying to avoid multiple shooters positioned at different angles. Maya pressed her back against the concrete, her breathing controlled despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Years of cardiovascular training, of teaching high-energy classes that demanded sustained physical output, had given her the stamina to maintain peak performance even under extreme stress. Her heart rate was elevated but steady, her oxygen intake measured and efficient. The 5th shot chipped concrete near her head, and Maya realized the gunmen were systematically eliminating her cover options. They didn't need to rush. The studio had only one exit, and they controlled it completely. This was simply a matter of patience and ammunition. She heard footsteps moving across the floor, cautious but deliberate. The older man was directing his companions to new positions, probably trying to establish angles that would make the column useless as protection. Maya knew she had perhaps 30 seconds before they completed their tactical repositioning. Her eyes swept the studio's interior, searching for anything that might shift the odds in her favor. The space had been designed for movement, for safety, for artistic expression. There were no weapons, no defensive positions, no communication devices except her cell phone sitting uselessly on the windowsill 20 feet away across open floor. But there were other tools, objects that took on new significance when viewed through the lens of desperate survival rather than dance instruction. The sound system's amplifier, heavy enough to cause serious injury if thrown accurately. Costume jewelry from her theatrical dance classes, including metal pieces that might serve as projectiles or distractions. The fog machine she used for special performances, capable of filling the room with dense vapor that would obscure visibility.
Maya's hand found the remote control for the sound system, still clipped to her belt from earlier practice. She had programmed several playlists with dramatic volume changes, sudden shifts from quiet to explosive sound that were designed to create emotional impact during performances. Now those same audio cues might serve a different purpose. The sixth shot punched through the drywall inches from her position, close enough that she felt the concussion wave against her face. Maya pressed the remote's activation button, and the studio suddenly filled with thunderous orchestral music, violins and brass instruments combining in a crescendo that made conversation impossible and would mask the sound of her movement. She sprinted from behind the column during a particularly loud passage, keeping low as she angled toward the storage closet. The seventh shot missed her completely, the gunman unable to track her movement through the disorienting combination of loud music and shifting shadows created by the late afternoon sun. Maya reached the closet and yanked the door open, revealing the accumulated props and equipment from 2 years of teaching various dance styles. Silk scarves from her interpretive movement classes, tumbling mats from acrobatic workshops, even a collection of wooden practice swords from a brief experiment with historical European dance forms. The eighth shot shattered a picture frame on the wall above the closet, raining glass down on Maya as she grabbed a handful of the silk scarves. The fabric was lightweight but surprisingly strong, designed to support dancers during aerial movements and partner lifts. More importantly, the scarves were vivid colors that would create visual confusion when thrown through the air. Maya emerged from the closet with an armful of streaming fabric, launching the scarves in different directions as she rolled across the floor toward a new position. The bright silks floated and twisted in the air, creating momentary visual barriers that confused the gunman's aim and forced them to track multiple moving objects simultaneously. The ninth shot went wide, punching harmlessly into the far wall, as the shooter instinctively followed one of the floating scarves instead of Maya's actual position. She used the distraction to reach the fog machine, a professional-grade unit capable of filling the entire studio with dense vapor in less than 60 seconds. Maya activated the machine and immediately felt the familiar hiss of superheated fog juice converting to thick white mist. The vapor began pouring from the unit in dense streams, spreading across the floor and rising toward the ceiling in billowing clouds that would soon make precise shooting impossible. The 10th shot came through the expanding fog, missing Maya by several feet as the gunman fired at shadows in movement that might or might not have been real. The mist was already thick enough to obscure details, turning the studio into a dreamlike landscape where shapes appeared and disappeared without warning. Maya used the growing concealment to retrieve one of the practice swords from the storage closet. The weapon was made of hardwood, weighted and balanced for realistic training, but without a sharp edge. In the hands of someone who understood leverage and momentum, it could still deliver devastating impact to vulnerable targets. The fog continued to thicken, and Maya heard the gunmen shouting to each other in their native language, trying to coordinate their positions and maintain effective fields of fire. Their professional training was working against them now, as they struggled to adapt tactics designed for open terrain and clear visibility to an environment that changed by the second. The 11th shot flickered through the mist like a deadly firefly, visible only as a brief muzzle flash before the darkness swallowed it again. Maya was moving constantly now, never staying in one position for more than a few seconds, using her intimate knowledge of the studio's layout to navigate safely while her attackers struggled with unfamiliar terrain. She heard one of the gunmen stumble into the damaged ballet bar, cursing as splintered wood caught his clothing. The sound gave her a precise location, and Maya moved toward it with the practice sword held in a grip she had learned during her brief exploration of historical combat dancing. The 12th shot came from her right, much closer than expected. Maya spun away from the muzzle flash, bringing the wooden sword around in a horizontal arc that connected solidly with something soft and yielding. A human grunt of pain echoed through the fog, followed by the metallic clatter of a dropped weapon. Maya didn't pause to assess the damage. She flowed away from the collision point, disappearing back into the mist as the wounded gunman's companions tried to locate both their injured partner and their elusive target. The fog was now so thick that visibility was reduced to less than 3 feet, turning the studio into a maze of shifting vapor and uncertain shadows. The 13th shot went high, fired blindly into the white void by a gunman who was beginning to realize that his professional advantages were evaporating along with his ability to see his target clearly. Maya heard him moving cautiously, probably trying to reach his wounded companion while maintaining some semblance of tactical formation. She had dropped the practice sword after striking the gunman, not wanting to carry unnecessary weight that might slow her movement or create noise during stealth repositioning.
Instead, she retrieved a handful of the metal costume jewelry from her theatrical collection, pieces that were heavy enough to create distractions when thrown, but small enough to carry easily. Maya threw the first piece of jewelry toward the far corner of the studio, where it struck the wall with a sharp metallic ping that immediately drew gunfire. The 14th shot punched into empty drywall as both remaining gunmen fired toward the sound, their muzzle flashes briefly illuminating their positions before the fog swallowed them again. She threw a second piece in a different direction, creating another false target that triggered the 15th shot. Maya was systematically depleting their ammunition while gathering intelligence about their positions and movement patterns. Each muzzle flash revealed not just location, but also posture, aim direction, and the shooter's level of stress or confidence. The older gunman's voice cut through the mist, sharp and commanding despite the acoustic dampening effect of the fog. He was trying to rally his men, to impose some kind of tactical discipline on a situation that had spiraled far beyond their expectations. Maya couldn't understand his words, but she recognized the tone of a leader struggling to maintain control. The 16th shot came from a new position, indicating that at least one gunman was still mobile and trying to flank her anticipated location. Maya had anticipated this maneuver and was already moving perpendicular to his likely path, using a series of dance positions that minimized her profile while maintaining balance and mobility. She found herself near the sound system again, and a new possibility occurred to her. The amplifier was connected to multiple speakers throughout the studio, including several mounted at different heights and angles. If she could create sudden, localized sound bursts from specific speakers, she might be able to manipulate her attackers' movements and draw them into disadvantageous positions. Maya located the sound system's control panel, a complex array of switches and sliders that she normally used to balance audio levels during classes. In the dense fog, she worked by feel, adjusting settings to redirect the music's output to individual speakers rather than the full system. The 17th shot passed close enough to her position that she felt the bullet's wake, a tiny pressure wave that reminded her how close she was dancing to death with each movement. Maya triggered a sudden blast of sound from the speaker mounted directly above where she estimated the nearest gunman to be standing. The unexpected audio assault from above caused an immediate reaction. Maya heard stumbling footsteps, a muttered curse, and then the 18th shot fired wildly toward the ceiling as the disoriented gunman tried to eliminate what he probably thought was another threat. She used the confusion to move again, flowing through the fog toward a position that would give her access to more of the studio's scattered props and equipment. The mist was beginning to thin slightly near the windows where air currents from the building's ventilation system created subtle circulation patterns, but the center of the room remained effectively opaque. Maya's training in spatial awareness, developed through years of teaching students to navigate complex choreography without colliding with each other, served her perfectly in this environment. She could sense the dimensions of the space, feel the location of walls and obstacles, maintain her orientation even when visual references disappeared completely. The 19th shot came near the studio's entrance, suggesting that at least one gunman was falling back toward the exit, possibly preparing to abandon the mission if it became too costly or time-consuming. Maya realized this might be her only opportunity to prevent their escape and ensure they couldn't return with reinforcements or better equipment. She located the fog machine's manual override control and cranked the output to maximum. The unit responded by doubling its vapor production, creating such dense mist that even the faint outlines of the windows disappeared completely.
The studio became a white void where sound and touch were the only reliable senses. Maya moved toward the entrance, guided by her memory of the room's layout and the acoustic signatures of her attackers' breathing and movement. She could hear at least two of them near the door, speaking in urgent whispers as they tried to coordinate their withdrawal while maintaining some kind of defensive posture. The 20th shot never came. Instead, Maya heard the metallic click of an empty magazine, followed by the rapid sounds of a tactical reload. One of the gunmen had exhausted his ammunition and was switching to a fresh magazine, a process that required several seconds of vulnerability, even for highly trained professionals. Maya used those seconds to close the distance, emerging from the fog like a ghost materializing from white smoke. Her years of teaching contact improvisation, of learning to read and respond to another person's movement and balance, guided her actions as she flowed into close-quarters combat that had nothing to do with firearms and everything to do with timing, leverage, and the dancer's understanding of how bodies moved through space. The gunman was still completing his reload when Maya's shoulder drove into his solar plexus, a collision that combined the momentum of her approach with the precise targeting she had learned from partnering exercises, where dancers supported each other's weight and movement. The impact drove the air from his lungs and sent his partially loaded weapon spinning away into the fog. Maya followed through with a spinning movement that would have been recognizable to any student of martial arts-influenced dance forms, her legs sweeping the gunman's feet and sending him crashing to the floor with enough force to ensure he wouldn't be rejoining the fight immediately. She rolled away from the collision point as the wounded gunman's partner fired blindly toward the sounds of struggle. The 21st shot went wide, striking the studio's wooden floor and sending splinters flying in all directions. Maya was already moving again, using the fog as concealment while she processed the tactical situation. She had eliminated or disabled 2 of the 3 gunmen, but the leader was still armed and mobile somewhere in the white void that surrounded them. More importantly, he was between her and the only exit, and she had no way of knowing whether there were additional team members waiting outside the studio. The fog machine continued to pour vapor into the room, but Maya could sense that the initial dramatic effect was beginning to fade. Air circulation was slowly thinning the mist, and within a few minutes visibility would return to something approaching normal. When that happened, any advantage she had gained through environmental manipulation would disappear. She heard careful footsteps moving across the floor, the measured pace of someone conducting a tactical search while maintaining defensive awareness. The older gunman was still operational, still dangerous, and still determined to complete his mission despite the unexpected resistance he had encountered. Maya's hand found another piece of costume jewelry, this one a substantial metal bracelet that had enough weight to serve as an effective projectile. She threw it toward the far corner of the studio, creating a distraction that drew immediate gunfire. The 22nd shot punched into the wall harmlessly, but the muzzle flash revealed the gunman's position near the center of the room. He was moving methodically, probably trying to locate his fallen companions while maintaining situational awareness for continued threats. Maya realized that he was too experienced to be fooled by simple distractions much longer, and too well armed to be defeated through hand-to-hand combat unless she could achieve complete surprise. The fog continued to thin, and Maya could now make out vague shapes and shadows that had been completely invisible minutes earlier. The late afternoon sunlight was filtering through the mist in golden beams that created an almost ethereal atmosphere, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Maya positioned herself behind the damaged ballet bar, using the splintered wood as partial concealment while she studied her opponent's movement pattern. He was professional, disciplined, but also human. The stress of the situation, the loss of his team members, and the unexpected resistance had to be affecting his decision-making and reaction time. She waited until he was facing away from her position, then moved with the fluid silence that years of dance training had made second nature. Maya approached from his blind spot, her footsteps masked by the residual sound effects still playing through the studio's speaker system. The 23rd shot never came because Maya never gave him the opportunity to fire it. Her approach ended with a collision that combined elements of contact improvisation, theatrical combat, and pure desperate improvisation. The impact sent both of them sprawling across the hardwood floor, the gunman's weapons skittering away into the dissipating fog. Maya rolled clear and came up in a defensive crouch, ready to continue the fight if necessary. But the older gunman remained motionless where he had fallen, either unconscious or seriously injured from the collision with the studio's unforgiving floor. The fog machine finally exhausted its supply of fog juice and fell silent, leaving only the quiet hum of the ventilation system and the distant sounds of traffic from the street below. Maya stood slowly, her body trembling slightly as adrenaline began to fade and the full magnitude of what had just happened started to register. Studio 17 looked like a war zone. The mirror was completely destroyed, reflecting nothing but jagged fragments and empty frames. Bullet holes pocked the walls at various heights and angles. The ballet bar was splintered and broken. Costume jewelry, silk scarves, and electronic components were scattered across the floor like the debris from some surreal explosion. Maya walked carefully around the 3 motionless forms, checking to ensure that none of them posed a continuing threat. The first gunman she had struck with the practice sword was conscious but clutching his ribs, probably dealing with fractures or severe bruising. The second man, the one she had tackled near the entrance, was breathing but showed no signs of immediate recovery. The older gunman remained completely still, his expensive suit torn and dirty from the struggle. Maya retrieved her cell phone from the windowsill, surprised to find that it had survived the gunfight without damage. Her hands shook slightly as she dialed emergency services, trying to organize her thoughts and prepare for the questions that would inevitably follow. How did a dance instructor, with supposedly no natural rhythm, manage to survive an attack by three armed professionals in the confined space of her own studio? How would someone who struggled with basic coordination in high school manage to move through deadly gunfire like water flowing around obstacles? As sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder as emergency responders approached the building, Maya Chen realized that she had discovered something about herself that no amount of formal training or professional instruction had ever revealed. When survival depended on movement, when rhythm meant the difference between life and death, her body had found a music that no external critic could judge or diminish. The dance instructor who had been told she had no rhythm had just performed the most important choreography of her life, moving through 23 shots and 3 armed attackers without missing a single step. The cracked mirror that had reflected her failures and frustrations for so many months now showed something entirely different. A woman who had discovered that rhythm wasn't something you were born with or learned from others. Sometimes rhythm was something you found in the spaces between heartbeats, in the silence between gunshots, in the moment when everything you thought you knew about your limitations dissolved into movement that was more authentic than any technique, more powerful than any training, more beautiful than any performance. Maya looked around her destroyed studio one more time before the police arrived, seeing not just the damage and chaos, but also the evidence of a dance that had saved her life. Tomorrow, if there was a tomorrow, she would have to decide whether Studio 17 could rise from this wreckage, whether a dance instructor who had finally found her rhythm was ready to share what she had learned with students who might not need to dodge bullets, but could benefit from understanding that movement wasn't about just following the music others created for you. The first police officer through the door was Detective Sarah Reeves, a 15-year veteran who had seen enough crime scenes to recognize immediately that whatever happened in Studio 17 was far more complex than a simple robbery gone wrong. The scattered bullet holes, the destroyed mirror, the fog residue still clinging to the air, and 3 unconscious men in expensive clothing suggested something that would require federal involvement before the investigation was complete. Maya sat on the windowsill where her phone had been, wrapped in a blanket that one of the paramedics had draped around her shoulders. She watched the crime scene technicians photograph every angle, measure every bullet hole, catalog every piece of evidence that might explain how a dance instructor had survived what appeared to be a professional assassination attempt. Detective Reeves approached carefully, her notebook ready, but her expression more curious than accusatory. She had already run preliminary background checks on Maya Chen and found nothing more threatening than an overdue library book and a small business loan that was current on payments.
This was not someone who should have attracted the attention of armed professionals. "Ms. Chen," Detective Reeves said gently, settling into a folding chair that someone had brought from the building's conference room. "I know this has been traumatic, but I need to understand what happened here. These men aren't local criminals. Their identification documents are sophisticated forgeries, and their weapons are military grade. This isn't random violence." Maya pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, still processing the fact that she was alive when 3 hours earlier she had been planning lessons for students who might never return. The studio felt alien now, transformed from a place of artistic expression into a crime scene that would probably never recover its sense of safety and welcome. "I don't know who they were," Maya said quietly. "I heard voices in the hallway, looked out to see what was happening, and found them studying some kind of building plans. When they saw me, everything changed." Detective Reeves made notes while simultaneously observing Maya's body language, looking for the subtle tells that might indicate deception or withheld information. What she saw instead was someone still in mild shock, confused by events that had spiraled far beyond anything in her normal experience. The federal agents arrived within an hour, confirming Detective Reeves' suspicion that this case would quickly move beyond local jurisdiction. Agent Michael Torres introduced himself with the kind of polite efficiency that suggested he had dealt with similar situations before, though probably not in dance studios owned by innocent civilians. "Ms. Chen," Agent Torres said, reviewing the preliminary reports while crime scene photographers continued their work around them. "We've identified these men as part of an international network that specializes in corporate espionage and industrial theft. The building plans they were carrying show detailed layouts for several businesses in this structure, including Dr. Samantha Price's medical research laboratory on the 4th floor. Maya frowned, trying to remember what she knew about the building's other tenants. Dr. Price was a name she recognized from the directory, but they had never spoken beyond polite greetings in the elevator. She conducted some kind of pharmaceutical research, Maya thought, but nothing that seemed important enough to attract international criminals. Dr. Price has been developing breakthrough treatments for neurological disorders. Her research data is worth hundreds of millions of dollars to the right buyers, and several foreign governments have been trying to acquire her work through unofficial channels. These men were probably conducting reconnaissance for a theft operation scheduled for tonight." The implications settled over Maya like a cold weight. She had stumbled into something that had nothing to do with her or her struggling dance studio. Her survival had been accidental, the result of being in the wrong place at the wrong time and refusing to die quietly when professional killers decided she posed a threat to their mission. "The question," Agent Torres said, studying Maya with eyes that missed very little, "is how someone with no combat training, no weapons, and no tactical experience managed to defeat 3 armed professionals in a confined space. That's not something that happens by accident." Maya looked around the destroyed studio, seeing the evidence of her impossible survival scattered across the hardwood floor. Silk scarves still hung from the speaker mounts, like colorful prayer flags. The fog machine sat silent in the corner, its role in her survival as improbable as everything else that had happened. I just moved," Maya said finally. "Everything I've learned about movement, about reading space and timing and other people's intentions, it all came together when I needed it most. I didn't plan anything. I just danced." The phrase sounded ridiculous even as she said it, but it was the only explanation Maya could offer. She had spent years learning to move her body through complex choreography, to anticipate and respond to changing rhythms, to find grace and control, even when everything around her was chaos. Detective Reeves looked skeptical, but Agent Torres seemed more thoughtful. He had read the preliminary forensic reports, had seen the trajectory analyses that showed how Maya had moved through the gunfight like someone who understood exactly where each bullet would go before it was fired. Movement is a science. Spatial awareness, timing, prediction of human behavior patterns. The military spends millions of dollars training soldiers to develop those same instincts. You telling me you learned it by teaching people to dance? Maya nodded, though she knew how improbable it sounded. The truth was that she didn't fully understand what happened either. The woman who had struggled through high school dance recitals, who had been dismissed by professional instructors as lacking natural ability, had somehow found a rhythm that transcended anything she had ever experienced in a classroom or studio. The medical examiner's preliminary report confirmed that Maya had inflicted serious but not life-threatening injuries on all 3 attackers: fractured ribs, concussions, and various trauma consistent with close-quarters combat that favored speed and leverage over brute force. The older gunman was still unconscious but stable, probably suffering from a severe concussion that would leave him with headaches for weeks. As evening approached and the crime scene investigation began to wind down, Maya found herself alone in what remained of Studio 17. The police had removed the attackers, the federal agents had confiscated the building plans and weapons, and the paramedics had confirmed that she needed no medical treatment beyond observation for delayed shock reactions. Maya walked slowly across the floor where she had fought for her life, stepping carefully around the numbered evidence markers that indicated bullet impacts and blood spatter patterns. The space felt simultaneously familiar and foreign.
like returning to a childhood home that had been rearranged by strangers. Her reflection in the broken mirror was fragmented, split into dozens of pieces that showed different angles and perspectives of the same person. Maya studied the scattered images, trying to reconcile the woman who had opened the studio that morning with the one who had survived a professional assassination attempt that same afternoon. The phone on the windowsill began to ring, and Maya answered it automatically, expecting another call from investigators or insurance representatives. Instead, she heard the voice of Elena Rodriguez, one of her most dedicated students, a 62-year-old retired teacher who had been taking classes at Studio 17 since the beginning. "Maya," Elena said, her voice tight with concern, "I just saw the news report about what happened at your studio. Are you okay? They said there was some kind of shooting, but they didn't give any details."
Maya realized she hadn't thought about how her students would react to news of the incident. Studio 17 was more than just a business to many of them. It was a community, a place where people came not just to learn movement, but to connect with others who shared their passion for artistic expression. "I'm fine, Elena," Maya said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "It was complicated. Some people broke into the building, and I happened to be here when it happened. The police handled everything." Elena was quiet for a moment, processing this carefully neutral description of events that had probably involved much more drama than Maya was willing to discuss. "Will you be reopening?" she asked finally. "I know the space must be damaged, but we could help with repairs, fundraising, whatever you need." Maya looked around the destroyed studio, calculating the cost of repairs against her depleted savings account and uncertain insurance coverage. The mirror alone would cost thousands to replace. The damaged sound system, the bullet holes in the walls, the splintered ballet bar, the total expense would probably exceed the value of everything she owned. "I don't know," Maya admitted. "There's a lot of damage, and I'm not sure I can afford to fix everything that needs to be repaired." Elena's response was immediate and fierce. "Maya Chen, you listened to me. You gave me back my confidence after my husband died. You showed Mrs. Patterson that arthritis doesn't mean the end of movement. You taught Marcus that a 60-year-old man can learn to salsa as well as any teenager. This studio isn't just about dance. It's about proving that it's never too late to discover new things about yourself." Maya felt tears starting to form as Elena continued. "Whatever happened in that room today, you survived it. That means you're stronger than you thought, more capable than anyone gave you credit for. Don't you dare let fear or money or practical concerns stop you from sharing that strength with the rest of us." After Elena hung up, Maya's phone continued to ring. More students, friends from the dance community, even competitors from other studios who had heard about the incident and wanted to offer support. Each conversation reinforced the same message. Studio 17 mattered to people in ways that transcended business and finances. Maya walked to the storage closet and began collecting the props and equipment that had played unexpected roles in her survival. The silk scarves that had confused the gunman's aim, the practice sword that had eliminated the first attacker, the costume jewelry that had served his distractions and projectiles. Each item told part of the story of how a dance instructor had found the rhythm that saved her life. As she worked, Maya began to understand something that had eluded her throughout years of trying to build a successful dance studio. She had been focused on technique, on professional credentials, on competing with established schools that had better marketing and more impressive facilities. But her real strength had never been about formal training or traditional measures of success. Maya's gift was for seeing potential where others saw limitation, for finding ways to help people discover movement capabilities they never knew they possessed. Her own journey from rhythmically challenged teenager to confident instructor had taught her that dance was less about following established patterns and more about finding the unique rhythm that lived inside each individual. The next morning brought reporters, insurance adjusters, and building inspectors, all trying to document and quantify what had happened in Studio 17. Maya answered their questions patiently, but her attention was focused on a different kind of assessment, determining what could be salvaged and rebuilt versus what needed to be completely reimagined.
Agent Torres returned in the afternoon with updates on the investigation. The three attackers had been identified as members of a sophisticated network that specialized in acquiring proprietary research data for resale to foreign corporations and governments. Dr. Price's neurological research was apparently worth enough to justify significant risk and expense, though the operation had been compromised by Maya's unexpected presence and survival. The interesting thing, Agent Torres said, reviewing his notes, is that your actions probably saved Dr. Price's life as well as your own. The original plan called for eliminating anyone who might witness their activities, including other building tenants who worked late or came in early. Your survival forced them to abort the entire operation. Maya hadn't considered that her fight for survival might have protected other innocent people. Dr. Price was probably working in her laboratory 4 floors above while Maya was dodging bullets, completely unaware that her life depended on a dance instructor's ability to move through deadly space without missing a step. There will be a trial, Agent Torres said. The men you stopped are facing federal charges for espionage, attempted murder, and various weapons violations. Your testimony will be crucial for securing convictions that prevent them from threatening anyone else. Maya nodded, accepting the responsibility that came with surviving something that should have killed her. She would testify, would help ensure that the men who had turned her studio into a battlefield faced appropriate consequences for their actions. But first, she had a more immediate decision to make about Studio 17's future.
Price said finally, "My research, my laboratory, probably several of my colleagues who often work late. If those men had succeeded in their primary mission, they would have eliminated any witnesses to protect their operation." Maya studied the laboratory equipment visible through the office's glass partition, trying to understand work that seemed as foreign to her as dance movement probably seemed to Dr. Price. Both of them were pursuing knowledge that required years of training and dedication, but in completely different fields, with apparently no overlap. "I've been thinking," Dr. Price continued, "about the connection between movement research and neurological function. My work focuses on how the brain controls complex motor activities, especially in patients recovering from strokes or traumatic injuries. Dance therapy is actually an emerging field with significant therapeutic potential." Maya felt something shift in her understanding of what Studio 17 might become. She had been thinking about rebuilding exactly what she had lost, recreating the same business model that had been struggling financially before the shooting. But Dr. Price was suggesting possibilities that might transform the studio into something entirely different. "What if we collaborated?" Dr. Price asked. "Your expertise in movement therapy, combined with my research in neurological rehabilitation, we could develop programs that help people recover motor function through dance, create therapeutic interventions that are more engaging than traditional physical therapy." Maya walked back to Studio 17, with her mind spinning through possibilities she had never considered. Dance as medicine, movement as healing, rhythm as a tool for helping people rebuild their lives after trauma or injury. It was a perspective that transformed her years of patient work with struggling students into valuable expertise that could benefit people in ways she had never imagined. Elena Rodriguez was waiting outside the studio when Maya returned, along with nearly a dozen other students who had somehow coordinated their arrival. They had brought cleaning supplies, measuring tools, color samples for paint, and the kind of determined energy that suggested they intended to rebuild Studio 17 whether Maya was ready or not. "We've been talking," Elena announced, speaking for the group with the authority of someone who had organized countless school projects during her teaching career. "This studio means too much to too many people to let it disappear because of what some criminals did to it." Marcus Williams, the 60-year-old salsa student Elena had mentioned, stepped forward with a contractor's tape measure and a notepad covered with calculations. "I've been in construction for 40 years, he said. "I can repair the walls and floors. Mrs. Patterson knows a glass company that owes her a favor from when she handled their bookkeeping. Elena has connections with sound equipment suppliers from her church's music ministry." Maya looked around at faces that reflected determination rather than sympathy, people who saw the destroyed studio as a problem to be solved rather than a tragedy to be mourned. These were her students, but they were also teachers in their own way, showing her that rhythm wasn't just about individual movement, but about communities moving together toward shared goals. The rebuilding took 6 weeks. Maya worked alongside her students and volunteers from the broader dance community, learning construction skills while teaching impromptu movement classes in the building's hallway when people needed breaks from physical labor. The insurance settlement covered most of the structural repairs, but the community contributions transformed the space into something better than it had been before. The new mirror was larger and positioned to catch natural light from multiple angles. The sound system included equipment that could interface with medical monitoring devices for Dr. Price's therapeutic research. The storage closets were redesigned to accommodate both dance props and physical therapy equipment, creating flexibility for multiple uses of the same space. Maya also discovered that her survival of the assassination attempt generated interest from unexpected sources. A documentary filmmaker wanted to create a film about dance as self-defense. A publisher approached her about writing a book on movement therapy for trauma survivors. Universities began inviting her to speak about the connection between artistic expression and personal empowerment. But the most meaningful change was internal. Maya looked at herself in the new mirror and saw someone different from the woman who had opened the studio that morning 6 weeks earlier. Not just a dance instructor, but a survivor who had proven that rhythm could emerge from the most unlikely circumstances, that grace could be found in the spaces between gunshots, that movement could be about more than entertainment or artistic expression. When Studio 17 reopened, the first class was a joint session that included both Maya's traditional students and Dr. Price's neurological rehabilitation patients. Elena Rodriguez partnered with a stroke survivor who was relearning to control his left arm. Marcus Williams helped a young woman with traumatic brain injury practice balance exercises that looked remarkably like basic dance steps. Maya watched from the front of the room, calling out instructions that applied equally to artistic expression and medical recovery. Feel the rhythm in your heartbeat. Let your body find its own tempo. Don't worry about matching anyone else's movement. Find the rhythm that belongs to you. As the class progressed, Maya realized that the distinction between her original students and Dr. Price's patients was artificial. Everyone in the room was working to overcome some kind of limitation, to discover new possibilities for movement and expression, to find rhythms that transcended whatever challenges they had faced. The dance instructor who had been told she had no rhythm was now teaching others that rhythm wasn't something you either possessed or lacked. It was something you discovered, created, and shared with others who were on their own journeys of movement and growth. Maya's phone buzzed with a text message from Agent Torres, providing an update on the trial proceedings. All 3 attackers had been convicted and sentenced to lengthy prison terms for espionage and attempted murder. Dr. Price's research remained secure, and the broader network responsible for the attack had been disrupted by federal investigations that followed Maya's survival and testimony. Justice had been served, but Maya realized that her real victory hadn't been in the courtroom. It had been in the moment when she chose to rebuild rather than retreat, to expand rather than diminish, to transform trauma into opportunity for growth and connection. Studio 17 was no longer just a dance studio. It was a place where people came to discover that limitations were often illusions, that rhythm could be found in the most unexpected places, and that movement was about more than just following music someone else had written. Maya looked around at her students and patients, all of them moving to their own internal rhythms, all of them proving that dance was ultimately about finding the courage to step into space that might be dangerous, to trust your body to carry you through movements that seemed impossible, to believe that grace could emerge from even the most chaotic circumstances. The woman who had dodged 20 bullets without missing a step had learned that survival was just the beginning. The real dance started when you decided what to do with the life you had fought to keep, how to share the rhythm you had discovered with others who needed to know that their own music was waiting to be found. As the class ended and students began to gather their belongings, Maya walked to the window where her phone had sat during the shooting. The late afternoon light streamed through the glass in goldy beams that reminded her of the fog-filtered sunlight that had illuminated her fight for survival. But now the light revealed something different. A community of people who had come together to prove that art could survive violence, that creativity could emerge from destruction, that rhythm could be found not just in music, but in the shared determination to build something beautiful from the pieces of what had been broken. Maya Chan, the dance instructor who had finally found her rhythm in the space between heartbeats and gunshots, smiled as she watched her students leave, knowing they would return tomorrow ready to discover new movements, new possibilities, new rhythms that proved dance was about much more than just keeping time to someone else's music. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Rosa Esperanza Institute's research campus in Boulder, Colorado, 5 years after Elena's landmark legal victory. The facility had grown from a small office in Elena's home to a sprawling complex that housed laboratories, archives, and conference centers, where indigenous knowledge holders from around the world gathered to share wisdom and develop ethical research partnerships. Elena walked through the traditional medicine garden that occupied the central courtyard, observing how plants from 6 continents thrived in carefully controlled microclimates that replicated their native environments. Each species had been contributed by indigenous communities who partnered with the Institute to preserve traditional knowledge while exploring contemporary applications for ancestral wisdom. The garden represented more than botanical diversity. It symbolized the transformation that had occurred in how scientific institutions approached traditional knowledge. What had once been viewed as primitive folklore was now recognized as sophisticated science that had been developed through centuries of careful observation and experimentation. Elena's legal victory had catalyzed a global movement that protected indigenous intellectual property while facilitating ethical research collaborations. Dr. Amara Okafor from Nigeria was visiting the Institute to discuss partnership opportunities between her university's ethnobotanical program and traditional healers in West Africa. She had traveled to Boulder after learning about Elena's protocols for community consultation and benefit sharing, hoping to adapt these frameworks for African research contexts, where pharmaceutical companies had been documenting medicinal plant uses without consulting communities or sharing benefits from commercial applications. Elena met Amara in the Institute's consultation room, surrounded by displays that illustrated successful traditional knowledge partnerships from around the world. The walls featured photographs of indigenous researchers, community elders, and academic scientists who had collaborated on projects that honored cultural heritage while advancing scientific understanding. Each image represented a story of respectful engagement that contrasted sharply with the appropriation that had once been standard practice in corporate research. Amara explained the challenges facing traditional knowledge holders in Nigeria, where multinational pharmaceutical companies had been documenting medicinal plant uses without consulting communities or sharing benefits from commercial applications. Local healers possessed sophisticated understanding of plant chemistry and therapeutic applications, but they lacked legal protections that could prevent appropriation and ensure fair compensation for their contributions to medical research. Elena listened carefully before explaining how the Institute's protocols addressed similar challenges in other regions. The Rosa Esperanza framework required extensive community consultation before any research began, guaranteed indigenous communities control over how their knowledge was used, and established benefit-sharing agreements that provided ongoing compensation for traditional knowledge applications. Most importantly, the protocols ensured that traditional knowledge remained accessible to originating communities, regardless of commercial development. The conversation revealed how Elena's legal precedent had influenced policy development worldwide. Countries in Latin America had strengthened traditional knowledge protections after studying the Meridian Defense Technologies case, while international organizations had developed new frameworks for preventing biopiracy and ensuring community benefits from indigenous innovations. Elena's victory had demonstrated that traditional knowledge could be protected through legal challenges that established enforceable rights and meaningful remedies. Amara was particularly interested in the Institute's research methodology, which combined rigorous scientific analysis with respectful cultural engagement.
Elena explained how traditional knowledge holders participated as equal partners in research design, implementation, and publication, rather than serving as passive sources of information for academic investigators. This approach had produced more reliable results while building trust between indigenous communities and academic institutions. The Institute's laboratory facilities reflected this collaborative approach. Traditional knowledge holders worked alongside PhD chemists and biomedical researchers, contributing expertise that could not be obtained through formal academic training. Indigenous researchers used both traditional testing methods and contemporary analytical instruments to validate ancestral wisdom and explore new applications for traditional practices. Atlanta showed Amara through the Materials Engineering Laboratory, where researchers were developing construction materials based on traditional building techniques from indigenous communities in South America. The project combined ancient knowledge about natural adhesives and structural design with contemporary engineering analysis to create sustainable building systems that could withstand extreme weather conditions while minimizing environmental impact. The traditional knowledge holders involved in the construction research held advanced degrees in engineering and architecture, alongside deep understanding of ancestral building practices passed down through generations. Their contributions went beyond providing historical information to include innovative problem-solving that addressed contemporary challenges in sustainable development and climate adaptation. In the pharmaceutical research wing, Elena introduced Amara to Dr. Joseph Crowfeather, a traditional healer from the Northern Plains who held a doctorate in biochemistry from Stanford University. Joseph was leading research on traditional medicines that had shown remarkable effectiveness in treating conditions that conventional pharmaceuticals struggled to address. His work demonstrated how traditional knowledge could complement contemporary medical understanding rather than being replaced by it. Joseph Spentis explained how traditional healing systems approached health challenges differently than contemporary medicine, focusing on whole system balance rather than targeting specific symptoms or conditions. This holistic perspective had led to breakthrough discoveries about how medicinal plants worked synergistically to produce therapeutic effects that could not be achieved through isolated compounds. His research had resulted in new treatments that honored traditional practices while meeting contemporary scientific standards. The conversation with Joseph revealed how Elena's Institute had evolved beyond protecting traditional knowledge to actively demonstrating its scientific validity and contemporary relevance. Research projects consistently showed that traditional practices often achieved better results than conventional alternatives, particularly in areas like environmental remediation, sustainable agriculture, and holistic medicine, where indigenous communities had developed sophisticated expertise over centuries. Amara was impressed by the Institute's publications program, which ensured that research results were shared with both academic audiences and traditional knowledge communities in formats that respected different communication styles and cultural protocols. Academic papers were accompanied by community reports that explained findings in accessible language and provided recommendations for practical applications that could benefit indigenous communities directly. The Institute's approach to publication had revolutionized academic standards for traditional knowledge research. All publications required approval from participating communities and included community members as co-authors when their contributions warranted academic recognition. This collaborative authorship model had initially faced resistance from academic journals, but had become accepted practice after producing consistently high-quality research that advanced scientific understanding. The Institute's success in publishing peer-reviewed research had validated traditional knowledge in academic circles that had previously dismissed indigenous practices as unscientific. Elena's team.
The interview Maria conducted with Elena and Amara explored how traditional knowledge protection had become a global movement that connected indigenous communities across continents. Elena described how the Institute facilitated communication between traditional knowledge holders who were dealing with similar challenges and developing shared strategies for protecting cultural heritage while benefiting from contemporary applications.
These international connections had proven invaluable for communities fighting appropriation cases or negotiating research partnerships. Traditional knowledge holders could learn from each other's experiences and adapt successful strategies to their own contexts. Elena's legal victory had provided a foundation that other communities built upon to create comprehensive protection systems for indigenous intellectual property. Amara spent a week at the Institute observing research collaborations and learning about community consultation protocols that she could implement in Nigeria. She participated in video conferences with traditional healers in West Africa who shared their perspectives on ethical research partnerships and discussed challenges they faced with pharmaceutical companies seeking to commercialize medicinal plant knowledge. The conversations revealed common patterns in how traditional knowledge was approached by commercial interests worldwide. Companies consistently attempted to separate traditional practices from their cultural contexts, claiming that scientific validation transformed indigenous wisdom into proprietary intellectual property that could be patented and commercialized without community involvement. Elena's legal precedent had provided tools for challenging these appropriation attempts and ensuring community rights were respected. Elena worked with Amara to develop a proposal for establishing a West African traditional knowledge protection network that could coordinate legal challenges, share resources, and develop collaborative research partnerships with ethical academic institutions. The proposal drew on lessons learned from similar networks in other regions while addressing specific challenges faced by Nigerian communities dealing with pharmaceutical biopiracy. The Rosa Esperanza Institute had become a model that was being replicated in multiple countries, with Elena serving as an advisor for traditional knowledge protection initiatives worldwide. Each new institute adapted the core principles to local contexts while maintaining connections to the global network that facilitated resource sharing and collaborative advocacy. Elena's vision of protecting traditional knowledge had grown into an international movement that was transforming how indigenous wisdom was treated in research and commercial contexts. During Amara's visit, Elena received news that illustrated the ongoing impact of her legal victory. The International Court of Justice had referenced the Meridian Defense Technologies case in a ruling that required pharmaceutical companies to compensate indigenous communities for traditional knowledge used in drug development. The decision established international legal precedents that strengthened traditional knowledge protection globally and provided remedies for communities whose wisdom had been appropriated without consent. Elena's case had become required reading in law schools that taught intellectual property courses and was cited in academic papers across multiple disciplines. Legal scholars studied the decision as an example of how domestic courts could protect indigenous rights while advancing international law development. The case had influenced policy development in dozens of countries and had inspired legislative reforms that strengthened traditional knowledge protections. The influence extended beyond legal circles to business schools that now taught courses on ethical traditional knowledge partnerships as examples of sustainable development practices that could benefit both indigenous communities and commercial interests. Elena's model demonstrated that respecting traditional knowledge rights could lead to more innovative research results and stronger community relationships that supported long-term business success. Elena's work had attracted attention from technology companies seeking to develop sustainable alternatives to environmentally destructive manufacturing processes. Traditional knowledge about natural materials, energy systems, and ecological design principles offered solutions to contemporary environmental challenges in renewable energy, biodegradable materials, and circular economy development. These partnerships demonstrated how ancestral wisdom could address modern environmental crises while providing economic benefits to indigenous communities. The Institute's technology collaborations had produced breakthrough innovations in solar energy systems based on traditional understanding of light manipulation and thermodynamics. Indigenous knowledge about plant-based materials had led to development of biodegradable packaging that could replace petroleum-based plastics. Traditional water management techniques had inspired sustainable urban infrastructure that could address drought and flooding challenges in cities worldwide. Each technology partnership followed the Institute's protocols for community consultation and benefit sharing, ensuring that traditional knowledge holders retained control over how their wisdom was applied while receiving appropriate compensation for their contributions. These collaborations had become profitable for all parties involved, while demonstrating that ethical traditional knowledge partnerships could compete successfully with appropriation-based business models.
Amara's week at the Institute concluded with a presentation she would deliver to university administrators in Nigeria about establishing ethical traditional knowledge research programs. Alana provided templates for community consultation protocols, benefit sharing agreements, and publication standards that respected both academic requirements and indigenous cultural values. The materials would help Nigerian institutions develop research partnerships that honored traditional knowledge while advancing scientific understanding. Alana connected Amara with traditional knowledge advocates in other African countries who were working on similar initiatives. These connections would facilitate resource sharing and collaborative advocacy that could strengthen traditional knowledge protection across the continent. Alana's model was being adapted to address specific challenges faced by African communities while maintaining core principles that ensured community control and fair compensation. As Amara prepared to return to Nigeria, she reflected on how Alana's journey from corporate researcher to traditional knowledge advocate had created opportunities for indigenous communities worldwide. The Rosa Esperanza Institute had demonstrated that protecting traditional knowledge was not just culturally important, but scientifically valuable and economically beneficial for all parties involved in ethical partnerships. Alana's transformation had required courage to challenge powerful institutions and vision to imagine alternative approaches to traditional knowledge that honored indigenous rights while advancing scientific understanding. Her success had inspired similar transformations in researchers, policymakers, and community leaders who recognized that traditional knowledge protection was essential for addressing contemporary global challenges while preserving cultural heritage for future generations. The Institute's impact extended to educational institutions that had reformed curricula to include traditional knowledge systems and indigenous scientific methodologies. Medical schools now taught courses on traditional healing practices alongside conventional therapies, while engineering programs explored traditional technologies that offered sustainable alternatives to resource-intensive contemporary approaches. Alana's work had legitimized traditional knowledge in academic contexts that had previously dismissed indigenous wisdom as unscientific. Alana's legacy was visible in the careers of young indigenous researchers who had gained access to educational and professional opportunities that had been previously unavailable. The Institute's fellowship programs had supported hundreds of students who combined traditional knowledge with formal academic training to become leaders in their communities and advocates for indigenous rights in professional contexts. These emerging leaders were carrying forward Alana's vision while adapting it to new challenges and opportunities. They were developing innovative approaches to traditional knowledge protection that addressed contemporary issues like climate change, technological development, and global health challenges. Alana's work had created a foundation that future generations would build upon to protect indigenous wisdom while ensuring its contributions to human knowledge and well-being. The Rosa Esperanza Institute had become more than Alana had ever imagined when she first challenged Meridian Defense Technologies' appropriation of her grandmother's recipes. It had evolved into a global movement that was transforming relationships between indigenous communities and institutions while demonstrating that traditional knowledge could contribute to addressing humanity's most pressing challenges when properly respected and ethically applied. Alana's journey had proven that individual courage could catalyze systemic change that benefited communities worldwide. Her decision to challenge appropriation rather than accept it had created legal precedents, policy reforms, and institutional changes that would protect traditional knowledge for generations. Rosa Esperanza Morales' recipes had indeed contained explosive potential that had detonated assumptions about indigenous wisdom and scientific validity, creating space for traditional knowledge to be recognized as the sophisticated science that it had always been. The revolution Alana had started would continue long after her own career ended, carried forward by traditional knowledge holders who had gained tools and support to protect their cultural heritage while contributing to human knowledge and development. Alana's grandmother's legacy would live on through research partnerships that honored indigenous wisdom while addressing contemporary challenges, ensuring that traditional knowledge would be preserved and respected for future generations to inherit and build upon.
Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.